Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 4th of September 2017. I'm Joe, and with me are Jesse.
Good evening.
And Ikey.
Morning.
And so we're back after a month, essentially, because the last episode wasn't really a proper episode, was it? It was just us messing around with some other podcast people.
It feels like a very long time, and we obviously have to note that Phelim is unable to make it this fortnight.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about him. He's basically dead to us at this point. It's going to be like six weeks between episodes for him. But yeah, he's like on holiday or something, so fuck him. So we should talk about OggCamp briefly. I always think that event coverage is a bit boring if you weren't there, but we probably should talk a bit about it. That's why we didn't have a proper episode last time. We had just the one recorded live at OggCamp. So Jesse, tell me a little bit about your experiences of OggCamp.
There was a bunch of fairly average kind of presentations and things, and then one on the Sunday afternoon by me that was absolutely brilliant.
It was brilliant, yes. It felt like you'd actually prepared it really well, but then you hadn't at all, had you?
No, so it was a bit of a late night, presentation. It's a bit of a different podcast in the hotel room. I made the mistake last time of staying out to the wee hours and always feeling terrible the next day. So this time I made sure that when the pub closed and we moved on, I moved back to the hotel room and got some shut-eye and was therefore fresh the next day. But on the Saturday, I'd been badgered by enough people to do a presentation, and I'd wanted to do it, but I'd wanted to prepare in a sort of very lengthy way that I normally do. But actually, pushing it into a small 2 a.m. kind of presentation preparing slot was much better, and thank you very much, went well. But on a serious note, I think there was some great presentations and the venue was really, really good. I know that the Ubuntu podcast that we shared the stage with has sort of rattled through a bunch of them with John that they had on, so if you want to hear a bit from the organizer of the event, do listen to that. I know you didn't make it for the whole of the Sunday, Joe.
Well, no, I didn't make it for like the afternoon. Well, I'm not getting up early on a Sunday. It's bad enough I had to get up early on a Saturday.
Okay.
I stayed out way too late, got way too drunk, and yes, turned up about lunchtime. But that was basically my plan anyway. No one turns up for the morning of the Sunday unless you're a loser like you.
I enjoyed it. I got to see some of the. They did repeat some of the presentations of the first day because the problem is there are 3 tracks, and so the main track in the auditorium they had maybe 70% pre-filled with guest speakers such as Richard
Brown.
Thank you very much. And they had a guy from Matrix. They had someone who was doing a presentation about translating PS2 games from Japanese into English. There was, what was the other one I saw in there? Anyway, and then they had the other 2 tracks. And so obviously the problem is with 3 tracks is you can't always see the things you want to see. So it was actually quite nice that some people repeated themselves and allowed you to see it again, or if you missed it on a Sunday, and then watched the Admin podcast, a recording of their show.
Yeah, which I did for them, and they gave me one little mention in the notes. And yeah, thanks guys. Even on the next episode, they didn't thank me for it. So fuck you. I'm joking, of course. I like doing that sort of thing for them. But yeah, I produced it for them. That's why they had good audio quality for once.
Ooh, that's right. Get your little burn in early.
And luckily, you're gracious about it.
Yeah, of course. That's the main thing. So, Ikey, you did not go because you couldn't afford it. Have you got any questions for us about it?
What was the weather like?
It was pleasant and slightly raining at times.
Was there a good turnout?
It was all right. It was better than I had feared, but not as good as I may have hoped. It was lower than in previous years. I don't know why that was. It may be because Canterbury is a little bit harder to get to than some of the other cities that it's been in before, or maybe it was the timing of it. Maybe it wasn't promoted heavily enough. I don't know. And I think that the fact that there wasn't one last year and it's kind of lost a bit of momentum didn't help. But I went to look at a venue in London, but the bottom line is that's only available on August bank holiday in 2018 if we want the 2 days. So that might not happen. I don't know.
The most important question I think I have, and I think listeners would have as well, was there any shenanigans?
There was quite a heated debate between, Wimpress and Richard Brown, and I was egging it on. That was on the Saturday night in the Student Union bar there.
Let me guess. It involved snaps and flatpaks.
Yes, and who is responsible for it, and whether or not Canonical should be responsible for the snaps that they're effectively publishing, and whether or not relying on confinement is enough. But we'll get back to that probably in a bit. But yeah, it was good all in all. It was a good venue and everything, and the two parties were pretty good, and the third pub on the Sunday was good. But one thing I noticed about Canterbury, there's an awful lot of like homeless people and reprobates and stuff around.
Yep.
It just wasn't really like, it's a weird juxtaposition of this like beautiful historic city or town or whatever it is. I mean, yeah, it's got a cathedral, it must be a city, but then just like a lot of shady people hanging around. But
well, that part of Kent has a long-standing a denial of the problem, really. So they actually get sent from Rochester, from Canterbury up towards Rochester or down towards Folkestone, which is basically going about 20 miles in either direction out of the town. So you will start to see as you go up towards the cathedral, because I've seen it there myself a few years back, you'd have tents and everything. So it's a real long-standing problem there. And like you say, you've got the beautiful architecture, and then, the depravity of civilization because the local authorities don't want to admit the problem.
Well, before we get too political, suffice to say, I had a good time. I would go back there happily because the venue was so great, and fun was had by all. I did miss a lot of faces who weren't there for various reasons, and that was a shame, but hopefully they'll come to the next one anyway. Right, any closing thoughts on that, Jesse, or should we move on?
Annoyingly, something came to me while you were talking about it, and it has gone out of my head, so I'd only be repeating what you already said.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's do a little bit of news. The first one, I'm not sure who put this in, but Sailfish for the Xperia X. And this is a ROM that Yola are trying to sell for €50 for the Xperia X, which is a Sony phone that I believe is quite nice, but you have to first buy the phone and then pay them $50 for the ROM. Yeah, good luck with that is all I can say.
I mean, Sailfish is the one that I think we would, or certainly I would hold up as the best possible contender to Android and iOS, I guess. I mean, it doesn't help that the other major contenders have fallen by the wayside, but even when they had Firefox and the Ubuntu phone, I felt that this was kind of the one that was most usable, because we reviewed it a couple of years ago.
At OggCamp 2 years ago.
Absolutely, yes. And it seemed the most sleek and elegant, and the fact that it integrated Android apps really had a huge selling point, because then you didn't have that whole problem with building your own app store and what have you. But I do agree that having buying it, in quotes, but all you get is a ROM, and it does say that they don't have a very slick installation process. You're going to have to use the command line and things, and the phone is currently £300. It's not expensive, but it isn't a brand new flagship phone, which I think probably works more in its favour. Sony make very good phones, and the fact they've got a version that's not stupidly expensive means it is a bit more approachable. But annoyingly, some of the key things for me, Bluetooth and fingerprint reader, those functionalities don't work. The step counter doesn't work, and an FM radio that is yet to work. So there are some things in there that for £50, or in a total £350, you'd kind of hope would be working.
What do you think about this, Ikey, then? Would you pay £50 for a development ROM?
Well, I mean, if it was an older phone, I kind of probably would. So, like, my phone is abandoned. It's a good phone. I paid a lot of money for my phone. Like 400 plus euros for it. Might even
because you
more.
Wouldn't take our advice and buy a proper OnePlus.
Because I wouldn't take your advice about getting the OnePlus. So, yeah, I can kind of see the appeal. It's that whole thing, like giving a breath of fresh life into a phone, and it's supposed to be great user experience with their OS, so I'd be kind of tempted. Maybe if it was like 30 or something, a little bit cheaper, because 50 is a bit much. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, if there was a range of phones, like it would work on all Sony phones, or there's these 3 Samsungs, these 3 Sonys, these HTCs, whatever it might be, you'd have a better
chance.
But on that point about longevity, it's only supported for a year, and then they're talking about having continuation to follow after that, and it does smack a little bit of we'll charge you another $20 when a year's passed for you to get your update. Or maybe not, but there's that sort of, they've left the door open for that.
Hang on, can we just get real for a second? Clearly, what this is about is they need money to pay back the tablet backers, and they don't have enough money to pay them back. And they were saying that any revenue they make, any profit they make will go into paying those people back. Well, this is just a cash grab as far as I can see. When I talked about this on LAN with Chris, he was saying that it makes sense that they need money for ongoing development, but color me cynical, I can't help but feel that what's going to happen here is they've got this sort of half-baked, almost working ROM, which they're going to chuck out, charge a load of people €50 for, and then use that money to keep the whole company afloat and pay off these tablet buyers and all that. And it just, I'm very cynical about the whole thing. And I don't want to be, because as you said, Jesse, the situation with Sailfish is it is basically the only reasonable competitor to Android, Tizen aside, which is kind of, that's more for other embedded devices by the looks of things. They don't really want to push that too much on the phones, but we'll see. But yeah, anyway, I want Sailfish to do well, but it just seems that Yola don't have a clue what they're doing when it comes to business.
But at least you can say you bought something that you had to install from a Linux PC.
That is quite funny that you need Linux to do this. I don't know if it's anything beyond ADB and stuff, but yeah, I haven't looked into it enough because I haven't got the phone in question. But it is funny that you do need Linux for it. But let's move on and talk about another Linux phone.
I was about to say, given that we said there's no other option, suddenly Librem have stepped into the breach with the Librem 5. They're, I want to get this right, free operating system phone.
Yeah, which is GNU plus Linux.
Can you watch YouTube on it? I've got to ask, can I do anything on it?
Well, probably with HTML5 in the browser. Look, I really, really want this to happen, but I'm not paying £600 for a phone that has no firmed up specs yet and has a delivery date of January 2019. No thanks. But Phelim is really excited about this, and it's a shame he's not with us because he is the one who's like properly into wanting a free phone, and he's looked into Replicant and all that kind of thing. But does this have any chance? We've seen what happened with Ubuntu. It's quite difficult, and that's an understatement, to put a mobile OS together based on Linux and make it good. And to make a consumer product here, they're not selling this as a development thing. I don't know. I've been very cynical about them in the past, and they have delivered to some extent with the core boot stuff with the laptops that I thought they would never be able to do. And so I really want them to surprise me on this.
Yeah, but I mean, have you seen their competitive chart? I mean, yes, there is the whole philosophy aspect of this, and that's great, but it's still a product, right?
Yeah.
And the comparison chart, like between Pure OS, iOS, and Google Android, is like, does it run GNU plus Linux? No. Red, no. It's like, oh no.
Yeah, and like every single one is yes. So user controls device, trackers disabled by default.
It's a fucking joke, that chart. Like, obviously it matters on the philosophy front, but it's just something, layered security protection. No. It's like, all right, how about we actually compare features that matter? Like, show the hardware? Yeah, I mean, it's like, does it support PNG backgrounds from user share backgrounds? Ah, no. It's kind of blowing smoke up its own arse in that aspect. But obviously, as usual, it's open, it's free, properly free. So it would be nice if it succeeds, but let's look at the real world applications of a consumer phone. It's not going to be able to do anything, because on my phone, I can watch, you said about HTML5 video, but yeah, you still need DRM for that stuff to even work. What's it going to use for a web browser?
Good point. But let's look at some positive aspects of this, right?
Okay.
Let's ignore the tiny 5-inch screen, which no one wants these days, apart from Stuart. CPU separate from baseband. Now, if that is true, that means that you can use it as a tablet with completely free software, potentially, because the baseband is the thing that is going to need blobs regardless, because like the law says that you need to have blobs for it. You can't open source them. And they're partnering up with Matrix as well, which means that in theory, if you are the kind of person who goes from place to place that always has Wi-Fi, which is most people these days, then you don't really need it to be a phone. And if you can use Matrix to speak to your contacts, then that's probably going to be good enough. And if you are into freedom enough, there's a word that I don't want to use. And it ends in ARD.
That one you always call Phelim.
Yes, the one I call him off air. Anyway, those kind of people, I think they're going to love this, man. If they can deliver this proper GNU Linux phone that doesn't have any Android bullshit in it, and it's totally open source or totally free software, whatever, and doesn't need proprietary software to run most of the things apart from the wireless radio, then people are going to love this. And we haven't mentioned the fact that they're planning for it to be a convergence device as well, because it's basically just running GNOME at the end of the day. And so you plug it in and then it should work with a screen.
Well, that's running GNOME Shell. Like, I'm looking at that screenshot and I've had to, well, mock up, really. I've had to really look in. That's genuinely GNOME Shell running on a phone.
Yeah, which some people would absolutely love. I wouldn't, and I'd look to install XFCE, which just for the lols.
Menu on a 5-inch screen.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, some sort of full screen launcher as well, maybe, I don't know. But I do it for the lols. But they're claiming that you can install all sorts of different Linux on it, but that means that each distro has to target that specific phone. But if it does well, then other distros will target it.
So hang on a minute, right? My sort of reason that you would get this or buy this is that if you watch their little video and like 40 seconds in, they have it on the slide with a little cable going to a monitor and a keyboard and what have you. So clearly, obviously, if it's running GNU Linux, you could have it in the same way as your favorite dream phone distro does that switching from Android to Linux.
Maru OS.
Maru. And so I was going to get you on that, but you seem to have started off with this saying, this is terrible, this is a stupid idea, it will never work. But all the way through, you agree with what they're doing, you want it to succeed, you see the plan, and it is a good alternative if all these things come together. It sounds like, actually, if you're a bit more flush with cash, you just drop it on it and hope it worked.
I think that is true. If I was some sort of billionaire who didn't have to worry about money at all, then I'd definitely back it. But a socialist utopia, Star Trek style, where we have free energy and replicators to make all the stuff that we need, including food, where no one has to work, that sounds like a pretty good idea, and I'm very much in favor of that. But is that going to happen? Not a fucking chance. And this phone sounds like a brilliant idea in theory, but is it going to happen? Apart from the fact that they need $1.5 million and they've only raised not even 200,000. Let's put that aside. Let's assume they do get the money. Are they going to be able to do it with $1.5 million? It seems very unlikely to me that it's going to be anything but shit.
Well, they've delivered hardware already, haven't they?
Exactly. And I mean, they've spent the last, 3 years trying to work out how you get a laptop delivered. So at least they've got some idea. They've got some experience. Yeah, they've got experience, they've got skin in the game. They're a better bet than some of these crazy people who start up on Kickstarter.
Well, yeah, I'll give them that. It is a better bet than most, but it seems like it's impossible. But that doesn't mean I don't want it to happen. I really do, but I just have to be realistic here, and I just can't see it happening.
I can't see it as a consumer device, really, not like a mainstream consumer device. But if they're not really going for mainstream, and I think they know that as well. They even call it, security and privacy focused. Jokes aside about like what it wouldn't technically be able to do, because like some of the stuff that we have to have, the non-free stuff, it's still based on Debian. So someone could quite easily they could even create effectively GNOME shell extensions for this if you think about it. That would allow it to install the bits to make it better, right? As like the non-free bits or Debian's non-free, you'd be able to install them on that.
Well, you'd be able to add repos to it. There's no reason why not.
And it's still free hardware. So if somebody wanted to make a different or a derived operating system for it that added all the shebang on there, you've got the hardware, and then you just download the OS for free and put it on there.
Yeah, or perhaps even port your OS to it, eh?
No. I see what you're doing there. No, not happening. But yeah. I mean, failing that, 50 quid for Sailfish.
Now, I am just going to sort of blow the trumpet for OggCamp, and as I said, we had the presentation on Matrix from one of the guys from the board. I can't remember if it was the CEO or quite, but it was one of the main sort of developers there, and he announced that Matrix had been approached by Purism to do this, and that was actually a world first announcement. So I felt very flattered to be in the audience at this great announcement. However, to pour a little bit of cold water on Matrix and them being used on the phone, the end part of his presentation was our main funder has withdrawn for reasons that Matrix is too good. It was a bizarre situation, and they are desperately looking for backers and people with funds to pump into Matrix to keep it going, and they're trying to go to other technology companies, whatever, to try and pump some money in. So it's not a great position for Matrix. I mean, he did a fantastic presentation, and I learned a lot. And you've been talking about it, Ikey, how Matrix is a interesting sort of idea, and how it melds all these different communication devices together in a sort of decentralized, clever, off-world way. And he explained it all very well, and it was really unfortunate that he ended on this sort of downside that actually they've got a real problem with funding. So that may well impact this phone as well.
Ah.
Well, that sucks. I didn't see that presentation. I was watching something else. So
that's a bit of a shame. I know recently I've been watching some of the GNOME mailing lists, actually, and there was a conversation going on about, I don't know if you guys are familiar with telepathy, some of the libraries that are used in back ends of like some of the GNOME chat clients, like empathy and stuff like that. It's getting a bit old, and somebody's proposed to actually replace all that with Matrix, because telepathy has all these little plugins and it handles each different protocol, but it does it in a way that has a significantly reduced user experience. So IRC just doesn't really feel like IRC, and you get that across all of the protocols. It's like a lowest common denominator thing going on with them all. Whereas what Matrix seems to be doing, and it's got a hell of a lot of popularity, like even in the IRC channels I'm in, you'll see hundreds of people using Matrix. It offers them the native experience, but it handles all of the protocols for them, which, nobody has to go writing all the libraries anymore because they already have the system in place that lets you have all the accounts connected. So that could also suck for GNOME as well, because that conversation was started up, and then to not have funding, that's... Yeah, hopefully this thing with Purism would actually sort them out. Who knows?
Yeah, or we can just all move to Discord.
Or do we have to?
I have not, put it that way. All right, let's talk about a eccentric billionaire buying you a plane ticket and a hotel room in New York then, Ikey.
I know, and there was me really, really hoping that I was actually going to get the space ticket, but no.
A normal plane.
Only an airplane, only a plane, for God's sake. So yeah, I've been invited to the Ubuntu Rally in New York City at the end of September, which I think is the 25th to 29th. And for me, myself, the reason I've been invited is because of Solus and because of Snaps. I integrated them into the software center. But there's going to be loads of people getting there. Canonic was basically putting everyone in the same rooms, in the same hotel, to hack together, work together, network together. And I think that's pretty cool.
So hang on. 1 minute you put Snap support into Solus, and the next you're being whisked off to New York, all expenses paid. Sounds a bit dodgy to me.
Well, I mean, you flash a bit of the leg. No, what they're doing there is they're kind of helping us. They're helping themselves by helping us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, they want it to be widespread and adopted by everyone, of course.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I'll be getting to work with people who've actually worked directly on Snap and be able to see the likes of Martin Wimpress and Alan Pope, who have experience working with this stuff. So for me, I'll be nagging Wimpy all the time about how he's integrated Snap support into the software boutique, so that I can nick that sort of stuff into the software center in Solus. So it's good, as well as getting things actually done and working on that stuff and networking. Get to see people, cool people.
Do you know who else is going who isn't canonical people?
No.
That sounds like you do, but you're not allowed to say.
I plead the fifth.
All right, fair enough. It's sounds like the last one that they did was it in London? I think it was about a year ago.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go to London. Come on.
I know you don't go to that UK.
Nah.
But it sounds very similar to that Snap sprint that they had. They're very committed to this Snap situation, but this is a bit more than that. They also want to concentrate on GNOME and the desktop and everything to kind of prove people wrong that they're not just dumping it.
Yeah, it's getting basically everyone up and down the stack. So it'd be people who are integrating it into distributions, desktops, derivatives, and various use cases of Snap to get them all together talking and hacking on it. Just basically to get everything done, because it's not really that often you can get all developers really in the same room physically there to talk, because that's a whole lot more productive than having these disparate conversations across multiple forms of communication. Unless you're using Matrix, of course.
And Chris is going to drive across the country from Seattle, apparently, to go to this thing.
Oh, no way.
Absolutely. He said he's going to sleep in the car and stuff. That man is insane.
Oh, that's great, because then I can like throw stuff out the window. Just keep it in the car. He's like, he's lovely up here, Chris.
So I had a bit of a thought about snaps the other day, and I'll take a very brief interlude to explain how I came to this. Was that I did my presentation at OggCamp, and I used a piece of software called Sunweight, and it tells you when the sun will rise and fall. And I thought I'd get that onto a rival podcast from the UK as a command line appreciation, and I sent it on Twitter, and like 4 minutes later, Popey got back and he said, "Right, I've made it into a snap. Haha, aren't we great?"
There's a snap for that.
Exactly, there's a snap for that. And because I wanted to try out the snap, and I noted that he'd titled it incorrectly in his rush and haste to excitedly do it. He'd missed out the bit where you say what the snap does. So I thought I would go onto the website and get that wording that they've used, just the first sentence, so that it can be updated. And when I went onto the website, I noted that it hadn't been updated in 2, maybe 3 years now. It's a really basic C program. All it does is know where you are, know the telemetry of the sun and where the Earth is, and therefore your sun and your rise and fall will be the same for millennia to come. So it's not like doing anything complicated. It just makes it in a nice, easy to use format. And it occurred to me, I was like, oh, if this was maybe a web browser that was 2 years old, I would be very suspicious and not use it. If it was, some other bigger, more entrenched bit of software, I wouldn't use it. But because a snap's been made for it, and that's isolated, it's less worrying. This is a small piece of software, so I'm not so worried anyway. It's hardly touching my machine. It's not exactly, common throughout the world as a target. But if it was a bigger bit of software that I really wanted, but it was 2 years old, and a snap had been made for it, I would feel more comfortable installing it. And so actually, I think snaps can open up the door to older / deprecated / forgotten software, because you won't open yourself to security vulnerabilities.
There's another word for that kind of software. It's called feature complete.
No. Stuff will always need maintenance. Think of build failures. If the toolchain has changed, some of the headers have changed, something like that. Another library it depends on has changed. A bug has come about. A function operates differently. So this illusion that software is complete is shite.
No, it can be feature complete, but it does need a small amount of maintenance.
Right, but it needs a little bit of maintenance. But I mean, there is some stuff now that might not build anymore and isn't maintained anymore, but is highly desirable software. But like you said, with a snap, you can do things to make it build without having to modify the distribution itself. Or in the other direction, it might require really new stuff that the distributions won't have because everything's using a particular version, say of GTK or Qt, So you can get away with more in snaps that don't affect the whole system. So I think they're kind of good for that. Or like you say, abandonware, and it's like, well, fuck it, it's only a snap. It's not going to touch me system.
You two have properly drunk the fucking Kool-Aid on snaps, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Is that a sensible use of snaps? I mean, is it a beneficial sort of sideline, or is it actually a genuinely useful core function?
Well, I'd say so. Consider rolling release distributions. They're moving further away from that baseline when that software was written. And like you say, it could even be something like a Python script. It's just using an older version of Python. Doesn't work with the distribution anymore because it requires the older versions of the libraries. it's not going to do anything bad. You know, it might not even be something that you're worried about security. It might just not work with a more updated distribution anymore. But if you've got it in the snap, problem solved.
Well, I remember in the live show, Jesse, you basically just said, yeah, I really think all IoT devices should use snaps and Ubuntu Core and everything.
Yeah, I do. I think the fact that you can push out updates even to the kernel and things like this, and if it fails, it rolls back, but that you don't have to have and you can have not just the kernel, but each small bit of software, the stack all builds up in snaps, and you can just push them out to like all these devices all at once. It just makes so much sense.
I think the most important aspect, though, of snaps, while it does allow this side stuff, which obviously is real handy for the whole, normal Linux distribution side of things, I still think one of the main things is we can finally make package managers an implementation detail of distributions. So that if a vendor is targeting Linux, they can worry less, because it's not like, well, I need a package for that. And then people themselves worry about distribution. So like, for something like Solus, like you've got some moody shit called EOPKG. The fuck is that? Where am I getting a package for that? It's now getting to the point where people won't have to care what package manager the distribution is using. Like, that won't matter anymore. Because if the vendor wants to put out an application, because if it's something that Linux you would normally package anyway from source code, the vendor doesn't need to be putting out packages of it. That's something a distribution typically does. But if it's something that's, something that's very, very complex or server orientated or has stack complications or isn't fully free or open source, then they can put it out themselves with the snaps. And I think that's the main appeal for that vendor provided software when there are distribution issues.
But you see, that is where I think you differ from Canonical. You see snaps and to some extent Flatpaks as a nice solution to
third-party distribution. That's my view, yeah.
Yeah, but they see it as a solution to all software distribution.
I'm not entirely sure they do. Because if you look like at Ubuntu itself, like the normal Ubuntu, it's still very much deb packaging. That's required.
But isn't that just for now? And that ultimately, once snaps get to a point where they can be used for everything, they will be used for everything?
It kind of already is, like with the Ubuntu core stuff. But that's,
yeah, exactly.
But that's a derived product, isn't it? That's still derived from the real distribution.
Well, to me, it's just a separate distribution, really.
No, it's still taking the stuff that's in the quote real Ubuntu distribution, the stuff that is nuts and bolts and actual .debs. So that's like the real distribution, and the snaps are produced using that stuff. Obviously, they can have their own stuff and they can replace stuff, but that's where the base of it's all coming from. The real Ubuntu. So something like, the Ubuntu guys can correct me if I'm wrong, like in the comment section, but it's a derived product, which is chiefly a repackaging of the real distribution. So something like using snaps for it would allow you to productize the Linux distribution into something that's containerized, is my view of it. You'd still need like the real distribution behind the scenes, like as the raw feed.
So you don't think that we're going to see, for example, in 10 years from now, a situation where you've got a deb-free Ubuntu?
I don't think it really matters. And I think that's the most important thing. The way that we're starting to get the world to see now, because LSB, basically failed. Linux standards based. You must have RPM. You must have Q. Those kind of things failed. But I think what we're starting to see now is people concerned with targeting specific uses and runtimes effectively. But if you can mitigate the need for runtimes, I think packaging just doesn't really matter anymore. And I don't think anyone should care whether it's snap or deb, like same for any distribution, because what is a package? It's a fancy tarball, effectively. Whatever way you do it, whether it's a squashed file system, you're just gift wrapping a file system in some format or another. I don't think anyone should truly care about the package format. It should be more about the availability and distribution and making sure that thing still runs the same way for everyone concerned.
Well, there's a bit of a difference, though. But a traditional package doesn't show up as a fucking block device in LSBLK, does it? whereas every snap has to be mounted as its own file system. So it is, by nature of how they do the confinement and everything, that's how you have to do it. But it is a very different approach.
Yeah, but I mean, you could have a snapped OS root, if you think about it, which would be like your very, very core basic stuff. And then you could have another one on top of that, which provided another set of services. You wouldn't do it at the granularity that you have of a traditionally packaged operating system. I just don't think you'd do that, because you'd want to get away from having thousands of individual packages and the dependencies between them and making them all fit. Instead, you kind of want to look at it from a big picture perspective, don't you? Instead of having all the bits fit together, having that one thing that's cohesive.
I mean, I've just installed Solus on my laptop, and let's say that was 4 snaps. For whatever reason, you need a network one and a graphics one. Let's say it's 4. I've now installed another 15 bits of software on top. So I'm not saying that, I agree that maybe even if the core OS is a cleverly packaged set of snaps, you're still going to have all of the bits of software that people install on top. And if you're in a snap ecosystem, there will be that many individual file systems. However, I'm not asking you to argue that or not, but I would say that's not a problem. People get used to the fact that, look, I've got 25 file systems, and that's the way people would look at their computer.
Just another package.
In fact, you could almost witness, use that as a way of seeing what's installed. I just wanted to ask, could we have had the whole conversation for the last 5-7 minutes we've had and replaced the word snap with Flatpak and had the same conversation?
No.
And why is that?
Okay, so one of the problems with Flatpak is scope limitation. Flatpak requires a very specific environment to actually work, and that environment is a desktop. It's very, very specifically a desktop, and that means it has to be running within a desktop session. That, like you've got your D-Bus and you've got your Pulse Audio or Wayland or X11, all that stuff has to exist there. And the idea is it passes and controls that environment in a way that's safe for the external processes, for what's internal to it. But because they're desktop only, you couldn't have like the whole system be that. And I'm not saying that you should one way or the other have a whole system that's snapped or flat-packed, but Flatpak is desktop only. And if you look at snaps, they can be anything. They don't have any requirements on what they should be.
And so ignoring the point about whether your desktop is a snap or not, but the previous part about distribution agnostic and delivering software and things, there's no major difference if vendors were to target Flatpaks in 5 years as the key single containerized packaging method versus snaps.
Yeah, it's just a form of distribution. With the end goals are still the same, having a consistent end user experience regardless of the host environment.
Okay.
Right. That's enough of this future talk.
That is enough. Now, Joe is going to move on to talk about a thing, but I've just remembered the point I was going to make at OggCamp, which I forgot way back in the intro. It's come back to me as a flash. So very quickly, everyone I met who listens to this podcast mentioned DD, the bunch of bastards.
I was going to mention it with all those SquashFS mounts. It makes LSBLK a lot more cluttered, and therefore you're more likely to DD the ISO over SDA.
I thank you for your pardon on my behalf when in my absence on the 2 shows ago. I'm sorry to Pop OS. I made a massive error and it was my fault. And everyone I've met was like, "Oh, as soon as I heard, I knew what you'd done." And to the point where the lovely Martin Wimpress did a lightning talk titled "How Not to Be a Jesse."
Yeah, by using some GUI tool instead of DD. But yeah.
I was going to prepare a patch for DD itself, but I thought I was going too far. Just to detect if it was.
That's right. Hold my hand.
There is a little trick you can use. If you look at dmessage in your terminal, just look at it first so you can sort of see what the output looks like. Then put your USB stick in. It'll then come up that a device has been added, and it'll say something like SDB or something. So you'll actually know what the root device assignment is the second it's gone in. So you can see yourself as like, oh, there's a new line in dmessage from the last time I've run it. So you actually know where you stand. And I always use that, and that helps. Except for when I don't, and then I lose my backups.
Or you could always run gparted and have a nice GUI tell you.
Oh, that's not cool.
That's what I used to do before LSBLK, but then I started trusting that. Anyway, right. So I've decided, fuck Linux. I'm moving to Mac, and so no, not really. But I have been playing with a Mac this week, an eMac. I came home the other day, and my neighbor was about to go to the dump with various things, including an eMac. Now, for those unfamiliar, it looks somewhat like an iMac, but this was from around, I think, 2004, 2005-ish. It's a CRT. It is heavier than anything I've ever carried in my life, basically. And it's got no fucking handle either. I think they were designed to like not get stolen from schools because the E stands for education. But anyway, it's a PowerPC G4, I think 1 gigahertz with about 700 and something megabytes of RAM. And I have tried everything to get Linux running on it. Bear in mind that it was perfectly functional when I got it. It was running OS 10.5 or whatever, 10.4. And it was just working absolutely fine. And then every Linux distro that I've tried, and I've tried various versions of Ubuntu Minimal and stuff. Bear in mind, this only has a CD drive, so anything from DVD, it just forget about it. So it has to boot from a CD. I think you might be able to possibly get it to boot from USB, but even a modern Mac, I struggle to get to boot from USB. So it's got to be from the optical drive. So it's got to be CD. So it's got to be under 700 megabytes for the ISO. And I've tried Ubuntu Minimal, 1604, 1610, 1404. The only thing that I've managed to get to boot on it and install properly is Kubuntu 1204. And that worked absolutely fine. And then I updated that to 1404 and it sort of worked, but it had really fucked up colors. And then I updated to 1604 and then it just broke. And I tried Debian and same situation. Like even without a graphical environment, it gets almost through booting and then it just goes to a black screen and just nothing's happening. So if anyone has got one of these things and any experience, please tell me what distro to run on it, because I've promised my wife that I will get rid of it. Oh yeah, that's another thing. If you're in London and you want it, then you can have it, basically. As when I'm finished playing with it in a week or two, you can have it, because my wife is not going to let me keep it. And I'm not going to let me keep it, to be quite honest. It's just cluttering up the place. So it's really annoying. I mean, the bigger point is, why would you want to use a PowerPC machine when everyone is dropping it? Even Debian, the latest version of Debian doesn't support PowerPC 32-bit that this is. So it's just totally obsolete at this point.
When I read this in the notes earlier on, I thought you meant like Emacs. Hair removal cream. It's like, no wonder you couldn't get Linux running on it. Like,
that's eMac.
Now I know, don't I? It's like, well, why was he trying to put it on there then? But at least you know now why it was going to the rubbish bin.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's just completely obsolete. And you turn it on and you get the bang of Apple. And then the fan in this thing is like so loud. It sounds like your server when it's building, Ikey. And it must be using a hell of a lot of power as well. So I've probably burnt a lot of electricity.
It is nice to retro though. Like, and it's kind of like, in a sense, for tech people, I guess, it's like the ultimate boys' toy. Getting the more retro you go, the better it is. Like, I've really got a hankering to get myself a Commodore 64 again. Just because.
Yeah, why not, man? I mean, I was thinking about getting a PSP, an old PSP, and putting some sort of custom firmware on it to play emulators, to play Sonic and stuff like that, Mega Drive games. But yeah, anyway, I thought I'd just briefly mention this. So yeah, if you want it, it's pretty much yours. If you're in London, you have to drive. There's no way you can get this on the tube. It's too heavy.
The tube train won't take it.
Yeah, you'll break the tube. You'll break your suspension in your car carrying it.
But luckily enough, you got the fans on there. You will cool everyone down on the tube. So you'll be the most popular person there.
Yeah. And yeah, I need a distro to run on it in the meantime. Something that will work on a G4. And don't say Ubuntu or Debian. I've tried them. They're not having it. But if there's any other distros that I have not found yet, then please let me know. And
I pray it's Gentoo.
Gentoo.
That's what I said.
And I was thinking, like Gen 2 on a fucking i5, how long does that take to compile? It would take like the heat death of the universe would happen before Gen 2 would finish compiling on this fucker. I'd have to cross compile it.
I've noticed there's a bit of a pattern emerging. I can't do G's and J's.
Yes. Well, I'm sure there's a GIF for that. Or is it a GIF? We just don't know.
Or is it SIF?
No, use that to clean your toilet. Anyway, right. This episode of Late Night Linux is sponsored by Entroware, who also sponsored OggCamp. So thanks for that as well. They are a dedicated Linux computer seller in the UK, and they sell computers with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate 1604 and 1704. And they've got a huge range of laptops, including a new one called Zeus, which is pretty beefy. It's quite expensive, but you get the specs for that. i7 processor and at least 8 gigs of RAM, that sort of thing. And a GTX 1070 as well, which is just way more powerful than I would ever need, but I'm sure some people would want it. But they've got real powerhouses like that all the way down to much less expensive machines that are good for email and light web browsing, that kind of thing. So you're bound to find something that you want. And this is a company who cares about Linux, more importantly. They'll make sure that the firmware and everything's working properly before they ship their machines. And they're basically ideal for anyone who wants to run Linux and wants a hassle-free experience. They come with Ubuntu and Ubuntu Mate, but the one I've got, I've thrown all sorts of distros at, and they work perfectly. You're not going to get support from them for other distros, but I don't think you're going to need it, quite frankly. So they ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, do mention us at checkout. There's a little box you can fill in Late Night Linux, and then they'll know we sent you. So check out entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. So on to a bit of admin then. So thank you to everyone for supporting us on PayPal and Patreon. It is very much appreciated. And if you want to join them, go to latenightlinux.com/support. And if you want to get in contact with us, there's email and Telegram group and all that kind of stuff on latenightlinux.com/contact. So Ikey, you have been whoring around again, and you've been on Destination Linux for the 11 millionth time.
Yeah.
Talking about Solus 3.
Yeah, I kind of do that. I get around.
Ooh, yes, you do.
Yeah, I've got that in my head as well now. Yeah, that was kind enough to have me on, and far be it from me to turn people down. To I get to talk. No.
Yeah, for 90 minutes. I had to listen to that today while I was clearing my desk out. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. But at least you had desk clearing music. There's not many people can say they have that. Yeah, I got to talk about Solus, got to see Rocco and Ryan, and basically just keep talking and talking and talking. Kind of like I'm doing now. Yeah. Basically that for 90 minutes. No, it was enjoyable, and it's up on YouTube, and they share it other places, right?
Yeah, well, they've got a proper website, thanks to someone, that has got a proper RSS feed. They only have an MP3 because, hey, that's free enough these days. But yeah, either YouTube or MP3. So check them out, destinationlinux.org, and you can hear more from Ikey.
If you're really, that sad and depressed that you feel you need to.
Yeah. All right, so I want to talk about funding models and the new funding models. They're not that new these days. But what's prompted this was a news story a couple of weeks ago that Disney is pulling most of its stuff from Netflix to start its own streaming service. And it just got me thinking, like, people only have a certain amount of income to spend on this kind of thing. And if it was all centralized in one place, people might be able to spend 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, whatever quid per month. But if you've got Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu Plus in America or whatever, HBO Go, Disney,
Sky, Virgin,
this, that, and the other, and that's your kind of mainstream stuff. But then you've got all these other creators and Linux distros and FOSS projects that all have a Patreon, and we have a Patreon. I've just plugged it not long ago. Now, the question that I have is specifically for you, Ikey, because you are someone who is basically living off Patreon now.
Mm-hmm.
surely there comes a point where the market is totally saturated and there just is not enough money to go around, because if everyone's got their own Patreon, then who's going to pay for people?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to get to the point where we're actually going to have to go back and have like real jobs, which is a terrifying prospect.
Or advertising, but that's the point, is that people are trying to get away from advertising and go to this.
Yeah, it is getting saturated. I don't really think it's sustainable, and I mean, it's basically what you say. It is saturated. Everyone and their dog now has it. Patreon has become GeoCities.
Yeah. So, Jesse, how many people do you support? Not necessarily on Patreon, but including big companies and small independent broadcasters of any or creators. How many people are you supporting at the moment?
If we're looking at what I would call sort of minor payments per month, like not my TV license, but yeah, sort of £5, £6. I think it's maybe 4. So it's not like it's going to kill me to go to 5 or 6. But if, for example, I had to pay like for each of the TV channels independently, and well, my girlfriend pays for Netflix, that's a bonus. But there was more things became, rather than like under one umbrella, they became more granular. You'd have to then, like I say, find more and more money to pay for all these things. But if you look at it from the other way around, when things become more granular, you can be more specific as to what you want. So take, I know it's not exactly what you're talking about, but Virgin Media. My parents had that, and when you wanted to watch, I just wanted the Discovery channels, for example, all the info and nature documentaries and things, but you couldn't get like a Discovery package. It was just level 1. There's some sport, some cinema, some sewing, and some Discovery. Level 2, there's more of each of those. And to get all the ones that you wanted, you had to get all the way up, but you ended up with all this crap you didn't want. Whereas now I know Sky, for example, are doing it so you can get just the football ones and just the golf ones and just the so-and-so. You can be more specific and more targeted. And actually, if you look at it from that point of view, it means that you can put your money where you want it to go more easily. So 5 years ago, pre-Patreon, as far as I'm concerned, whether or not that's true, if I wanted to give money to a Linux distribution, I could easily give it to Ubuntu, because as soon as you download it, they ask for it. And, hats off. I think it's a sensible way to do it. OggCamp was sponsored by the Linux community, by the Ubuntu community. So that's a great use of that money. I wanted to give it to Debian. I'm sure I could find a way. But if I wanted to give it to some of the more niche distros, I'd find it very difficult. Whereas now, I can. So isn't that a better thing? I can put my money, into the distribution that I'm using, or into the free and open source project that I'm using. If every single application vendor produced a Patreon page and I knew that was going to be there, I could just, I really, really like this particular piece of software. I'm going to give him £5 a month for this year. And then in the new year, I will review my spending. You get that granularity. So I'm going to say it's quite a good thing.
So you'd say like it's actually allowing you to really vote with your wallet now.
Exactly. So, I mean, the Ubuntu sliders, if you've ever used it when you download Ubuntu, you can say, I want to put my money into, I think back in the day they had the phone. You could put it into the desktop, you could put it into server, you could put it into community, and there's maybe a dozen or so. And it meant that they could see, okay, fair enough, it's a little bit different, but they could see where people were putting money and therefore what was popular from people downloading it. And if you expand that and ignore Ubuntu, as a point, you could say, right, this particular distribution is getting a whole load of funding. It must have something which is going for it, and maybe it should therefore get big backing from a multimillionaire or something. But it at least gives you that granularity for people to A, vote with their wallet, and B, see trends as to what are successful. We always joke about the multiple video editors. If there was one video editor that got 5 times the Patreon funding as the other 7, wouldn't it make you think, well, that's the one that's going to succeed? Because it's getting all the funding, it will make better decisions, not better decisions, but it will make it have more money going into its software development, which will make it better, which will make people pump money into it, which will make it better, and it will become the de facto video editor versus having 7 other ones.
I suppose so. And in a way, you've got this separation, haven't you, between the corporate distros and the independent ones. And I suppose if you use several different distros, some people probably do. I tend to stick to Ubuntu on everything because I'm boring, but some people might have Solus on the laptop and Debian on the server or whatever. I suppose if you're using a corporate distro like Ubuntu or SUSE or Red Hat, then you're not really of a mindset to donate to them. But then if you're using Solus or Elementary or whatever, you might donate to them on Patreon. So I suppose in a way, money will find its way where it needs to go. But I do worry about this watering down of people's wallets. And at some point, something has to give. You think that it's only a couple of quid a month here and there, but eventually you have to stop supporting some of the things that you're supporting. And how do you compete in that market? It makes it, at the moment, it's kind of, we're still in the early stages, I feel, of crowd support or crowdfunding, whatever you want to call it. But once that gets totally saturated, you're going to have to dance like a monkey, basically, to get people to support you.
I mean, in a sense, because it's going the way of true capitalism, in a sense. This is all about consumer choice, and it will get to the point where, I've got all these channels, but I only want them ones. And, Jesse, we're going to have to talk about this level 1 sewing channel later on, so you can just fill me in the deets on that one. But, it is going to be a case of, dance, monkey boy. That's going to be a thing where you're going to have to fight harder in the market. Well, there's a term for that, dog eat dog. It's not really a bad thing because it's the whole survival of the fittest, isn't it? If something is shite, then it's going to wean away and die. I hate to be bad about it, but, it could even happen to Solus someday. Someone says, well, fuck this, not supporting this anymore. This one's doing a better job. Well, then I would have to fight harder to compete with them, wouldn't I? So I think it can only lead to good developments. It's going to force people to compete. Competition is good. It's going to force people to improve stuff. So I don't know. I think it's good. I mean, I'm looking at this skewed perspective of software. It's obviously a bit different with other types of content, but yeah, I think in our part of the world, like over free and open source stuff, I think it would be a good thing to have that competition.
Well, let me counter your argument with one word: Heartbleed. And the thing is this, right? That OpenSSL is a project that up to that point had got no love because it was just doing its own thing. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't doing anything interesting. It wasn't dancing like a monkey. And so the problem is you get something flashy that's moving really fast, like KDE Neon or what you're doing with Solus.
Sure, but they're umbrella projects. And I think that's the thing. You can't just have like something that's very, very, very... you can in certain things, like you say, you'd have the sexy applications, right? People would support those. But I think largely the likes of Patreon would be umbrella projects in terms of software. And let's not forget, when Heartbleed did happen, you didn't really have what we have now with Patreon, because some of the people are on there now, we're still finding our way around it and seeing what works best. But in response to that, the industry did actually stand up, and they did put coins in the coffer, and they did make sure that sort of thing didn't happen again. And that's sort of when the open source development and money started to go back towards each other. Now it's okay for people to be paid.
Yeah, we end up with a core infrastructure initiative.
Yeah.
It is an example, I feel, which is outside of this discussion, because Heartbleed should be an industry-funded project. There are other projects which are absolutely crucial to infrastructure, which should be industry-funded.
And should be under, like, an umbrella.
Exactly. They should come under maybe the IPCC or whatever it is that gives out domain names, or, or some sort of conglomerate that needs them for the internet to function. So I would say that, okay, it was a fault, no one saw it coming, and it happened, but I do think it's an outlier in this conversation.
I do think the Independent Police Complaints Commission is very important to free software and domains as well. ICANN. Remember it as ICANN has cheeseburger. That's how I remember.
Yeah, okay, let's ignore the police. in this discussion. But like the other view that I would have is maybe this goes against the whole point of having Patreon. But if you look at what the Ubuntu Mate project is doing, they are fortunate in a position to have a very large number of backers who wish to give them money and are generous enough that they don't. The Ubuntu Mate project doesn't need. I don't want to say they don't need all the money, but they would like to reinvest that money in a way that they see fit. And so if someone has, for example, updated the icon pack, they will give them some money, or if they've fixed a bug, they'll give them some money. Or if there's a piece of software that has been used critically throughout the production of that distribution, they will fund that particular project. So while everyone is only giving money to one Patreon, and that is the Ubuntu Mate project, Ubuntu Mate then doles it out amongst other people as a conglomerate is the wrong word, but like as a sort of umbrella to give it out to the useful individual projects that wouldn't have otherwise been funded by those people individually.
I can confirm this because I've actually received money from this exact example for the Brisk menu.
And so how did that work? Were you looking for money and asked him how you could get it?
No, not at all. There wasn't anything like that. So the Brisk menu started a long time ago, and it was basically like, yeah, how hard can it be? Stupid question to ask. I started it, and then Martin showed some interest in it for Ubuntu Mate. I was like, well, if you could do these things. Basically, it was like a bug bounty, right? So here's a feature thing, and Ubuntu Mate was sponsoring the development of this feature because Ubuntu Mate uses it. So obviously, we get a few quid out of it in terms of solace, and everyone benefits from that new feature being it, because something like Brisk, while it's technically a solace project, that means nothing. It's an agnostic piece of software for the Mate desktop, and we get a kickback, get everyone get to the feature, and that works well. And it's not just me who's done it as well. Like Stefan has now done a few as well. So some of those I assign them on the track to another person, and that's cool. So you're supporting Ubuntu Mate, but on the peripheral, you're also supporting other projects as well. And yeah, it all comes back to the whole umbrella thing.
Well, it's the free software dream, isn't it? You're getting people to pay for the development of free software, which then ultimately benefits everyone.
Yeah, and you're hoping that the person to which you're putting your money is a responsible purse that can then dole it out where it sees fit. I'm sure if the Ubuntu Mate Patreons suddenly saw that Martin was flying about on a jet at their expense, they'd be a little bit, their nose would be put out of joint somewhat. But because he's very open about where it's being spent and why it's being spent on certain things, and they're all going to funding things which are supporting that particular project, it's all going in the right direction. Now, is it unfair on a particular piece of software that Martin or the project hasn't chosen? You could maybe argue that if there's, 2 different Twitter clients and the Ubuntu Mate project has picked one, and therefore one gets funding but a rival doesn't, is that unfair? Or is that just being that one Twitter client was better and therefore is getting funding? There's always going to be some nuance there. But I do think that overall, given the granularity of Patreon, given the fact that normal people can go on Patreon like we can, and people can fund us to do this, and given that with enough money coming into Patreon, those responsible with big pockets can then share it to the smaller contributors of open source, I think means that you can, I think generally it's a good thing.
It's funny that there's a lot of Americans who are like really into Patreon, but what they don't realize is that model is essentially libertarian socialism. It is people having the choice to take part in what is effectively socialism. So like a small number of people will pay for everyone else to do it. So like Solus, for example, you've got a relatively small number of people contributing to the Patreon so that everyone can have it for free. But there's no obligation for them to do that, so it's totally voluntary. So it's libertarian in that sense.
Yeah, definitely.
But it is still socialism, and so there are some Americans whose mind I've probably just blown with that. But on that bombshell, then, I think we should wrap it up. We're well over an hour. So, yes, we'll be back, hopefully, with Phelim in 2 weeks for a proper show. In the meantime, I've been Joe.
I've unmuted my mic, and I've been Jesse.
And I'm still Ikey.
See you later.